Good morning, Old Testament scholars. I'm sitting here in my bedroom work table at my home. That's the beauty of online courses, isn't it? You can commute from anywhere. And today we're going to talk a little bit about Chapter 2. And I am particularly looking at your textbook at page 30 about the geographical features. And looking also on my computer at the PowerPoint that I uploaded for you, Old Testament geography. I want to just make a few comments about that today because I feel that the geographical understanding of the land of the Old Testament is very important. It helps us kind of center the stories that we'll be reading from Genesis all the way through to the end of the prophets. And when we talk about other nations, we'll have some idea about where they were. Because life in the ancient Near East was vastly different than it is today. If you look on your PowerPoint to slide 2, you'll see a shaded area there that is somewhat kind of in the shape of a C. And that's called the Fertile Crescent. It embraces land all the way from the Persian Gulf through the Upper Nile. And the important thing about the Fertile Crescent, it was so called because of its ready supply of fresh water, which made life bearable. See, there wasn't the ability to fly across these areas. There wasn't an ability to hop into a Humvee and get from point A to point B. You walked primarily, or if you were more fluid, you might have an animal to ride. But still, travel was arduous and it was dangerous, and you needed fresh water, not only for your animals, but for yourself to live. And so this area was the hub of civilization. Um, Israel, Egypt, Babylon, Assyria, later the Persian Empire, later than that, the Grecian Empire. Alexander the Great conquered it and settled there. It is uh, an area that has been controlled by many nations and many people across a lot of years. As a matter of fact, the area that you and I call Israel, uh, a French non-political term that you may have learned in your reading, is the Levant. It's referred to as the Levant so that it won't offend anyone. Because if you call it Israel, well, that offends Arabs and Muslims. If you call it Palestine, then that offends the Jews. And so many political types and archaeologists, scholars, refer to it simply as the Levant. Anyway, that area has been fought over, and it's the most contested piece of land in the world. More battles have been fought on the plains of Megiddo than anywhere else in the world. From pharaohs all the way through to Napoleon fought there. World War II fought across that land. Rommel and his forces. And more recently, Egypt and Israel have struggled there, as well as Syria and other nations. At any rate, the Fertile Crescent was the hub of life of its time. You'll want to know that term, Fertile Crescent. And while you're at it, looking at that slide, do you see the Tigris and the Euphrates River there that runs from the Persian Gulf upward? And it says Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is a word that means between the waters or between the rivers. That's literally what that term means. All right, if you looked at slide 3, you'll see basically a map of Israel. Note it's also part of the Fertile Crescent, though you really couldn't see its water, bodies of water on that other map. But here you see the Sea of Galilee in the north, which is a fresh body of water, and you see the Jordan River, which flows down through the landscape all the way to a much larger body of water called the Dead Sea, or the Salt Sea in the south. That Salt Sea is well named because it has numerous mineral deposits, as you'll see later on in the slideshow. And it is, as the other name implies, Dead Sea. Life, it doesn't sustain life, fishing. The water can't be consumed. The Sea of Galilee is the largest fresh body of water in Israel, and it supports a thriving fishing industry. On the next slide, slide 4, you can see some of the highways. It's kind of turned sideways here, so you'll have to reorient your thinking about it. We're looking at Israel as if we're looking from the coast of the Mediterranean and looking inward. And so now the Salt Sea is to the south is on our right, and the Jordan River running up to the Sea of Galilee, which is in the north, is on our left. So we've kind of turned the picture, if you will. But you see the roadways. One of them that comes from Damascus on the left of your slide, down around the Sea of Galilee, and then passes on to Megiddo. Remember, I talked about the plains of Megiddo, and down along through Gath, and the other way is called the Via Maris. It's also referred to as the Way of the Sea. Sometimes it's called the Way of the Philistines because it passes through the land of Philistia. And this was one of two primary trade routes that we're going to focus on. The other passes from Damascus to the east of the Jordan River, and it goes around the Salt Sea and then comes back in toward Egypt, down at the area where we cannot see on our slide here. And that's called the King's Highway. These two trade routes were primary in the day. Now, this has an additional one called the Ridge Road, which runs right down through the middle, across the very mountainous terrain, and runs through Jerusalem. But the two primary ones that we'll be focusing on are the King's Highway and the Via Maris, the Way of the Sea, or the Way of the Philistines. Those two roads, if you control those roads, you had access from north to south, that is from Asia and the trade routes that ran across there, down into the riches of Egypt and Africa. And if you had controlled those trade routes, you had power, you had resources, you had money. That's why this piece of land, even though it's very small in itself, was so hotly contested and so fought over, because whoever controlled it had money and power. It's the same story that causes a lot of wars today. It's about money and power. All right, slide number 5. If you look at it, you'll see one of the 4 geographic regions, and it is the coastal plains. The coastal plains extend for about 117 miles along the Mediterranean coast. At its broadest point in the south, near the Gaza Strip, the coastal plain is 30 miles wide. It's known throughout the country, but by various names. North of Haifa is called the Plain of Zebulun. From Haifa to Tel Aviv is called the Plain of Sharon. South of Tel Aviv, it's called the Plain of Judea. All of it is this coastal plain, and it is a beautiful area, isn't it? In slide 5. Here's another look of it in slide 6. Very, very pretty. It's a resort area today. Slide 7 takes us northward to the more mountainous part of it, and yet it does have its own kind of austere beauty. Note slide 8 and the caves. Those caves were often places to hide, places to dwell, and sometimes burial sites as well. Note the foliage growing along there. Also, Plane 9 is a view from up the hill a bit, across the coastal plain out into the Mediterranean. Just a beautiful, beautiful area. Now, it runs here in the north. You see Mount Carmel on slide 10, and then over toward Galilee. And it's kind of divided in this upper part into two sections. The Central Hill Country which is the next division. You've got the coastal plain and then the Central Hill Country. The Central Hill Country, running up here from Mount Carmel inward, encompasses this land around Galilee. The Upper Galilee region has elevations that reach up to about 4,000 feet above sea level, and those are about twice as high as the elevation of the hills of Lower Galilee. It's a difficult area to navigate. It's a protected, a closed area. Particularly in antiquity, it was very difficult to travel through there because of the deep valleys and the steep hills. Lower Galilee is lower in elevation than Upper Galilee by about half, and they are divided, if you will, by an imaginary line that runs east from Ptolemais, and you can see the map there on slide number 10. And the hills of Lower Galilee, the highest of those is only about 2,000 feet. 11 is just some of the scenery of the Upper Galilee Mountains. Slide 12, the Lower Galilee Mountains. Slide 13 shows us some more of that Central Hill Country. This is south of that, called the Hill Country of Judea. It has the plateau where Jerusalem is. You see that on slide 13. And it's the heartland of Israel. It stretches for about 40 miles from Jerusalem in the north, south to an area just north of Beersheba. The hills range from about 2,500 feet to 3,000 feet above sea level. It's composed of a lot of limestone. It has a very weathered look. It forms very deep valleys. This was the land of David. Remember his poem, Psalm 23, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death," a deep, dark valley. He was familiar with those from the terrain in which he lived near Bethlehem. This region is difficult to navigate again, and it thus has natural protection. And so when David moved the capital from Hebron to Jerusalem during his kingship, he chose wisely a place that was very defendable. Speaking of Jerusalem, slide 14 and slide 15 and 16 and 17 will give you some shots around Jerusalem today. It is a tremendous city. Then if you go to slide 18, you'll see the area or the plain, the lowlands, which are to the south and to the west of Jerusalem and Bethlehem. Shephelah means lowland. It's found in the Bible about 20 times in Hebrew. It's a long rectangular area of soft limestone, and it's about 27 miles long and about 10 miles wide. It's the foothills that separate the plain of Philistia, which is out in the coastal plain, from the Central Hill Country. Think of it as kind of a buffer zone there. Not chapter 19, but slide 19 shows you some of the area there and the fields and the way it's cultivated. Slide 20 introduces us to the next division. You've got near the Mediterranean, the coastal plain. Then you have the Central Hill Country that runs from the Shephelah in the south all the way up to the upper Galilee section. And then you have the Jordan Rift. The Jordan Rift Valley was formed when the tectonic plate moved northward and eastward away from Africa. And most river valleys are formed by erosion, but this was formed by, if you will, a volcanic movement. And so the banks of the river are not as fertile as you might think, and they're very hard and stony, and therefore it's prone to flooding. The Jordan River is called the downrusher because of this propensity to flood. The lowest point in the Jordan Rift Valley is at the shores of the Dead Sea, which is also the lowest point on land on the surface of the earth. That's some 400 meters below sea level, and it rises to almost 1,000 meters in the west and similarly in the east. The rift is a significant feature in the landscape of Palestine or Israel. The valley north of the Dead Sea has long been a site of agriculture because of the water available from the Jordan River and numerous springs located on the valley's flank. Also around that Dead Sea is the commune, the Essenes. We'll learn about them a little later, at Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. It's the most significant archaeological find of the 20th century. Slide 21 shows us the Sea of Galilee. Slide 22, Sea of Galilee. Slide 23, guess what? Salt Sea, or the Dead Sea. And slide 24, I threw in just for fun because the concentration of minerals is so great that you can just literally kind of sit down in there and float. It buoys you up. It's almost impossible to sink. And you see a guy reading a local newspaper. One last section to go in our geography of Palestine, and that is the Transjordan Plateau. It is the area, if you look at slide 25, that is across Jordan, on the other side of Jordan, the eastern side of Jordan. The Golan Heights are there today. During biblical times, cattle were raised there. It was known in the Old Testament as Bashan, and because of its propensity for raising cattle and the huge oak trees are there. By the way, both beef and dairy cattle are currently raised in that area as well. Slide 26 shows you some of its very steep hills, and 27, look there, there's Stake on the Hoof. Well, that takes us through the geography. I hope you have enjoyed a look at Israel. I look forward to hearing from you and discussing with you Chapter 2 on the discussion board. God bless you and have a great day.